Hello and welcome. As I was sitting down to do this book chat today, I was reminded of a Family Guy episode. The animated TV series. If you're not familiar with that, it concerns the sort of the dysfunctional Griffin family. And in this episode, the phone rings, and the son answers the phone and then yells out to Peter Griffin, "Hey, Dad, it's Mom." And Peter Griffin goes, "Please be Somerset Mom. Please be Somerset Mom," because he doesn't want his wife to find out whatever it is he's gotten into. So I was reminded of that episode because of today's book chat on The Razor's Edge by W Somerset Maugham, which is the most recent book that I finished. And following this chat, I'll also touch base briefly on what I'm currently reading, as well as do a drawing to let the randomness of the universe choose the next book in my reading order off of my priority reading list. But yeah, back to The Razor's Edge by W Somerset Maugham. This book was originally published in 1944 in the U.S. It was also published at the same year in Great Britain. My understanding, when I was reading up a little bit on the publication history, I read that the British edition is really collectible now, because in 1944 they had to use, it was wartime, and so they used a really, I think, low quality paper, and it's got, they tried to minimize the paper that was used, so it's a very kind of unusual edition. It's very fragile because of the paper that was used, but I thought that was kind of interesting to read up on that publication history. This edition that I read is the vintage ebook edition from, I believe, 2003. But I wanted to read this book. This book's been on my reading radar for a while. It fit my priority reading criteria, or my priority reading theme this year of books about seekers. And I had not long ago seen a movie adaptation of of The Razor's Edge that had also really caused me to want to read it. And there's a person who comments on quite a few of my videos, Lillian, who has recommended this to me on a couple of different occasions. So I did want to get it read, and then it did fit this theme that I was building some priority reading around this year of books about seekers. So I thought I would add it to my list and get it read this year. So what it's about is really, it's about, I ended up, speaking of the movie adaptation, I actually just called up the movie poster, which when I was looking up the movie, information about the Razor's Edge movie adaptation from 1946, I noticed that Norman Rockwell actually designed this graphic, this illustration for the promotion of the movie. He did a few movie illustrations, apparently. So anyway, you can see in the background there, we have in our main character Larry, and then we have our other main characters, the narrator, Isabel, Gray, and Sophie. So I'll talk a bit more about those folks here in a bit. The book is about, really the narrator is Somerset Maugham himself, is narrating the book as himself. So he's an author, he is him. And he meets, early on in the book, he meets some young people in Chicago while he's visiting in Chicago, who his life would then sort of intertwine with in and out. Sometimes it would be years before he would see them, but he narrates their story, these main characters' story, through the course of quite a number of years, and we follow them in this way. The main character is this character, I guess, Larry, who is a young man who's just come out of World War I. This is set immediately sort of following World War I is when the story begins, and Larry has been sort of traumatized by the war, and he comes back to Chicago and sort of falls into his old group of friends, among them his fiancée Isabel, and then his best friend Gray, who is from kind of a wealthy family. Isabel is as well, and then Isabel's uncle Elliot, I think, is how our narrator is actually introduced to these people, and then the story then follows really these main characters through the course of the next at least probably 15 or 20 years, if not. It's not real clear. It wasn't real clear to me how much time had passed, but it seemed like about 20 years. But yeah, so each of the main characters. So, like I said, the narrator, we don't end up knowing a lot about him because he is telling us this story of these people's lives. And so it's really kind of conversational like this. He doesn't learn the story completely and linearly. So sometimes he'll learn something because the characters will fill him in. Like he'll run across maybe one character that will fill him in on another character. And so, the story, then we get a kind of a complete picture of what's happened to these people over the course of this 20 years, like I say, starts in the early 20s and then goes right up until World War II, I guess. Yeah, so the main characters, Larry's come out of the war, like I mentioned, and he doesn't really know what he wants to do. His fiancée, Isabel, wants him to take a job with his best friend Gray's father's firm. They're kind of like brokers, like investment brokers, I guess. But Larry doesn't really want to do this. He really just wants to really go and I guess find himself or go on to a search for a meaning in his life after the disillusionment of World War I. Isabel, like I mentioned, is from a wealthy family. She really wants this life. She wants this wealthy life of parties and designer clothes and big houses and entertaining and fine art and everything that money can buy, basically. Gray is kind of a good-natured, sort of everyday man kind of guy. This is Larry's best friend. And then Elliot, Isabel's uncle, most of the time lives in Europe, and he's a real social climber. He has managed to meet a lot of the nobility of Europe in Paris, and he affects a sort of a snobbish American abroad kind of fulfills that sort of stereotype, and but he's a very social person, and so to him this is sort of what a good life is, which that's really one of the themes, I think, is that runs throughout the book, is what is a good life. There is a quote at the very beginning of the book that I thought I would read, because to me it sort of describes Larry, the main character, and then it's in the voice of our narrator, like I mentioned, but it really sort of describes what the book ultimately becomes to be about. And the quote is this: the man I am writing about is not famous. It may be that he never will be. It may be only when his life at last comes to an end he will leave no more trace of his sojourn on earth than a stone thrown into a river leaves on the surface of the water. Then my book, if it is read at all, will be read only for what intrinsic interest it may possess. But it may be that the way of life that he has chosen for himself and the peculiar strength and sweetness of his character may have an ever-growing influence over his fellow men, so that long after his death, perhaps, it may be realized that there lived in this age a very remarkable creature. This is Larry, because he really defies everyone who tries to tell him otherwise in order to go out on this search for meaning for himself. The other characters, as life takes them in different places, I mentioned the idea of what is a good life. They each have a different idea of what a good life is. So Larry's is, this sort of seeker in trying to seek and answers to life's sort of existential questions. That's a good life. Isabel's is to be stable and to have money and position and society. Gray, her later husband, Larry's best friend, his idea of a good life to me seems to be really more about work. He's sort of a typical and a stereotypical American, where work and making money and work is what the definition, being productive and pragmatic, is what is a good life to him. And then the uncle Elliot, his idea of a good life is society, high society, parties, knowing the right people, wearing the right things, eating at the right restaurants. this sort of social status. And then we have another main character that comes in a little later in the novel, and her name is Sophie. And I won't say much about her because I don't want to give anything away as far as spoilers would go. But Sophie has a different take on life at this point. We meet her very early on in the novel, and then later in the novel, after quite a bit of time has passed, and there has been time for most of the characters to experience some pretty significant challenges to their worldviews, or challenges to what they consider to be a good life. So each of the characters faces sort of their own demons, I think, when it comes to that. And each of them meets with various success and failures with addressing those. Larry's, I don't really want to give away too much more about that, I think, because that's really what the book is about. The book is taking us, the narrator of the book is actually taking us on this journey into these people's, these four main characters' lives. Larry, Isabel, Gray, Elliot, and Sophie, actually 5 characters. And, through going on and seeing through witnessing their lives as told through the lives of our narrator, then we're able to see sort of what they value, what their values are, what they think a good life is, what they think a good life for them has been in some cases, and then also what happens when that's challenged, if they're able to work through that or not. Because everybody's, I guess, different worldview. I think another thing that I took away from the book was how befuddled they get when other people don't share their view. So when none of these characters really each other, I think perhaps Gray and Isabel share the same values, and maybe Elliot also to some degree, but slightly different. Everybody's got a slightly different take on it, and everybody also suffers a bit differently when that worldview is challenged or threatened or destroyed in some cases. So, yeah, really, really interesting book. I love books about seekers. This one, I couldn't help but refer to that movie adaptation that from 1946 starring Tyrone Power and Gene Tierney. Anne Baxter won a Best Supporting Actress, actually, for that her portrayal of Sophie in that movie version from 1946. I couldn't help but see Larry as Tyrone Power, and I couldn't really help but see Elliot, the Uncle Elliot, was played by Clifton Webb, who also was nominated for an Academy Award for that performance. The movie itself was nominated for a Best Picture in 1946. In 1946, which was only a couple years after the book had been released in 1944. So, an adaptation, really fairly true to the book. Slightly different focus on some of the characters. Mainly, Isabel's a little different, I think, and Sophie's portrayed a little differently. And there's some other sort of side characters that are really interesting as well that are in the book that are not portrayed in the movie. But I thought overall the movie, I'd like to see it again now that I've read the book. But anyway, rambled on enough about that. Enough. What I'm currently reading. Jerusalem, the biography by Simon Sebag Montefiore. I just got started with this. So I'm only about 25 pages in. I have met my priority reading theme of place. So I am enjoying this so much so far. We're at the very, very beginning of the founding of Jerusalem in the Bronze Age. So got a ways to go on that big chunker yet. But anyway, anxious to dive into it. Where will the universe take me next? What book world am I going to inhabit following Jerusalem? I am going to pick this one. Let's just see. Demian. This is my my Herman Hesse book off my priority reading list. It's another tale of a seeker. Let's see. I don't think I have a good book cover for that yet. I might be able to find it. Just if I can find it quickly. Yeah, Demian. So Herman Hesse. I didn't mention about Somerset Maugham. This is the second Somerset Maugham book that I read. I read Of Human Bondage twice. And here is Demian. We do not have a nice cover, but there is the title page. I love this. There's a quote at the very beginning of it that I wanted only to try to live in obedience to the promptings which came from my true self. Why was this so very difficult? Why was that so very difficult? I love that quote. To me, that's just going to be a great book. Another seeker story from Herman Hesse. Can't wait to get into that following Jerusalem. So until next time, take care. Bye.